Alright, so now that we know how to simplify fractions and understand a little bit about them, we want to now talk about actually doing arithmetic with fractions. How do we add, subtract, multiply, and divide these fractions? And so this is something you want to get good at, because obviously these things are numbers and we need to be able to do the basic mathematical operations with them a lot. And so you want to make sure you understand how to do this. So let's talk about, first of all, multiplying fractions. Now, this video is just going to kind of walk through the procedures. I'll make some other videos in the future that talk about why these procedures are the way they are, and I think that's really helpful and might aid your understanding and ability to work with fractions if you watch those videos. But for right now, we're just going to go through the steps and the common rules that you're probably familiar with in this video. So let's first talk about multiplication of fractions. So for instance, let's take 3/4 times 8/9. Okay, now if we want to talk about multiplying fractions, there's a couple things that we want to keep in mind. The main rule is this, and we'll write it in real informal language. To multiply fractions, basically you're going to take the top times the top and the bottom times the bottom. It's that simple. One thing that makes it simple, and you need to remember, you do not need common denominators. So don't try to find them and use them. You can just use the fractions as they are. Be careful though if there are zeros involved, and remember what we talked about earlier about zeros. We should say this, we can do some simplification in this process, and we'll talk about that in this example. But let's just apply the rule in this problem, and the rule says just take the top times the top, which of course is 24, and the bottom times the bottom, which is 36. It's that simple. Now, of course, like we said earlier, the answer we get right here may not be the simplest version, and so we want to simplify that or reduce it if possible. And if we go through our process, again, if you've got a shortcut for this, that's fine, or if you've mentally done the math, but the most basic way to do it is to find the prime factorization. So 24 is a 4 times a 6, times a 6, and 36 is a 4 times a 9. I did that. Let's try that there. 4 times a 9. And so those are the two prime factorizations for these two numbers. And so we cancel common factors. Anything that shows up, we get to cancel that 2 and that 2. This 2 and this 2. This 3 and this 3. And we're left with a 2 on top and a 3 on the bottom. 2/3 is the simplified version. Now let's talk about maybe another way you could simplify this. So I'll go back to the 24/36. If you don't want to go the prime factoring route, sometimes people do this. They'll say stuff like, okay, what's the largest number that divides evenly into 24 and 36? And you may think, oh, well, 2 does, but can I get bigger? Well, 4 does, yes. Can I get larger than 4? And it turns out it looks like 12 is the largest. So what I just do is I say, okay, let's divide both numbers by 12. 24 divided by 12 is a 2. 36 divided by 12 is a 3. And notice that is our 2/3. So that's another way to simplify. Okay, so notice what we did in this problem. We just did top times top, bottom times bottom, got our answer, and then simplified. Okay, now let's look at it again, because there's something special that we can only do with multiplication that we can't do with anything else. And that special thing is we can simplify before we multiply. And if we do that, then we don't have to simplify after we multiply. So we can simplify before we multiply. And so the way I would suggest you do this is actually what happens, is what we do is we say, okay, we know we're going to get a 3 times 8 on the top and a 4 times 9 on the bottom. If I were to multiply those, that's what I would get. Do not multiply those. Remember, we're going to simplify before we multiply. So the 3 is there. Simplify means factor everything that can be factored. 8 can be factored into 2 times 2 times 2. 4 can be factored into 2 times 2. And 9 can be factored into 3 times 3. Now I can cancel common factors. A 2 and a 2, a 2 and a 2, a 3 and a 3. That's simplification. Now I would multiply anything that's left, and it just so happens that I only have one factor left on the top and the bottom, so there's nothing to multiply. But look what I got. I got my answer, and it's in simplest form. So see, going back here, I did not actually multiply. I just kind of put everything on top like it's supposed to be, the 3 and the 8 and everything on the bottom. And then you factor so you can simplify. Okay. Now, again, we have a kind of shortcut version of this that maybe you're familiar with. So let me write that over here. 3/4 times 8 9ths. Now, some people refer to this as cross cancellation, and what that means is before I multiply, so again, what I'm trying to do is simplify. Before I multiply, I look at the two numbers there, the bottom of one and the top of the other fraction, and I ask, okay, is there any common factor between 4 and 8? Well, sure, they both are divisible by 4. So let's do that. Let's divide both by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. Okay, so we've done that. Now we also can look this way and ask, are there any common factors between 3 and 9, or are they divisible by the same number? And yeah, the answer is 3. So I say, oh, well, 3 goes in there once, 3 goes in there 3 times, and so what am I left with? A 1 times 2 over a 1 times 3, which of course is 2/3. This is the same as this, all right? It's simplifying first and then multiplying. Okay, so that's how we multiply fractions. Let's talk about dividing fractions. And again, I'm just going to give you the procedure, and in another video I'll talk about why these procedures are the way they are. So let's do something like this. 5/4 divided by 15/8. Okay, so the procedure for doing division is we actually change it to a multiplication problem. Alright, so let's write this down here. Change to a multiplication problem, and the way we do that is we invert, we'll put this in real official language. Actually, invert the divisor. Okay, so the divisor is what we're dividing by. It's the second fraction. And multiply. That's the official version of the rule. We could reduce that down to just invert and multiply. And so in this case, that's the divisor. And so that's the thing we would invert. And once you flip it, invert means to flip it, right? So it'd be 8 over 15. Change it to a multiplication problem. And then do multiplication just like we talked about. Let me put an even more informal method down there. Copy the first fraction. This is how you can do division of fractions. Copy the first fraction. I'm going to write this down. Copy dot flip. So here's what this means. Copy the first fraction. Put a dot to indicate multiplication. And flip the second fraction. And that is the same as invert the divisor and multiply. So we are now to a multiplication problem, which we said was the simplest thing we can do with fractions pretty much. And so we run through the procedure. I always prefer to simplify or cross cancel before I multiply. So I'll look at, say, those two numbers and say, hey, do they share any common factors? And the answer is yes, they share a 4. So 4 goes in there once, 4 goes in there twice. And then look this way, do they share any common factors? Yes, a 5. 5 goes in there once, 5 goes in there 3 times. And now I'm ready to multiply to get a 1 times 2 and a 1 times 3. And after a couple times you stop writing the 1s, but remember they are there. And we get a 2/3. Just so happens that's the same answer as we got before. But that's how we divide fractions. Copy, dot, flip. So you flip the second one and change it to a multiplication problem. And there is the answer. And it's already in reduced form. Now, a couple things to be aware of. Sometimes our division comes to us looking like this. So maybe we'll try a problem like this. 2/9 divided by 3/4. So, well, that's what it looks like, right? So you see a fraction kind of with a fraction in the numerator and the fraction in the denominator. You just have to remember that's 2/9 divided by 3/4. And of course, if we cross cancel here, well, we can't cross cancel yet. We got to copy dot flip. So copy dot flip. And now we're ready to cross cancel if possible. So we just look, is there anything those two share in common? No, they don't have any common factors. How about this way? Do they have any common factors? No. So we can't do any simplification, so we're just now ready to multiply. Top times top is 8, bottom times bottom is 9, and we can look at that and see, oh, that's going to be the final answer. It can't be reduced. So that's one thing to watch out for with division. I'll mention this as well. Suppose both numbers we're working with aren't fractions. So suppose I'm going to divide 8/11 by 24. And this little thing that we'll talk about here applies for always working with fractions. 8/11 is clearly a fraction. 24 is a whole number. But remember what we can do. We can change. If one thing is a fraction, then that means in order for us to do the arithmetic, both things have to be fractions. So we'll just write 24 as 24/1. And now it's a fraction. And so this is equal to 8/11 times 1/24. Copy dot flip. Cross cancel. Look, those two share a common factor of 8. 8 goes in there once. 8 goes in there 3 times. These don't share a common factor, so we have to leave them as is. And so we multiply across. 1 times 1 on top. 11 times 3 on the bottom, and there is our final answer. Okay, and so if it's not a fraction, you can write it as a fraction by putting it over 1. And so that's how we work with fractions, with multiplication